Hello, and welcome to my channel. Today's tragic tale takes place in Bluefield, West Virginia. The town is just across the Virginia and West Virginia state line in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. In the 70s, which is when this story took place, it was a thriving transportation hub. Amtrak stopped services in 1979. The Mercer County Airport stopped commercial flights in 2007. In the 70s, the population was close to 16,000. In the 2020s, it has declined to just over 9,000. The decline was due to the closure of the transportation businesses I mentioned, as it caused many locals to lose their jobs. However, the terrain is quite beautiful. It is a mountainous region. The East River Mountain Scenic Overlook is near and right off the highway. There is an observation deck, a wooden swing, a covered picnic area, and if you want to get your exercise, you can trek up the hill beyond the covered picnic area and find built-in stone grills and more private picnic tables. Now let's get into the story. On December 28, 1972, 66-year-old Mary Osborne was a cleaning lady at the First Church of God, where she was also a member. She also worked part-time at Richmond Dry Cleaners, which was right next door to the church, and the church maintenance man, Mr. Miller, owned the cleaners. South Street is literally only 2 blocks, so Mary walked to these places. Mary had 3 sons and 4 daughters, 27 grandchildren and 21 great-grandchildren, and 3 great-great-grandchildren. Her husband John had passed away the year before, in October of 1971. Mary was also a Sunday school teacher and sang in the church choir. Mary lived in a house on a hill just 3 doors down from the church. She usually left her house at 6 a.m. in the morning. That morning was trash day, so she went to the church to put out the garbage that morning. A boy who was friends with the pastor's son came to the church to meet up with some friends to play ping pong. He entered the hallway and saw blood, a shoe, broken eyeglasses, keys, and false teeth laying in the hallway. The boy proceeded to turn on the lights and looked in the recreation room and didn't find his friends, so he picked up the glasses and the keys and went to the pastor's house, which was right next door. He handed what he found over to the pastor. The pastor and his son were preparing breakfast. When the boy told him what he had seen, the church pastor went to investigate and discovered Mary's body in a Sunday school room around 10 a.m. It appears the attack took place in a hallway near the church entrance, and she was dragged 15 feet to its location. She had been struck twice in the head with a blunt object. Nothing was missing from the church, and no weapon was found near her body. Mary's purse was found at her home. When police arrived, they saw that a window in the recreation room had been broken. Police questioned those at the scene, but all were cleared. A hammer wrapped in a towel was found in a boiler room by the church maintenance man, Mr. Miller. He said it belonged to the church and was normally in a toolbox. It had been wiped clean, but was being examined as a possible weapon. Police suspected the killer was waiting for Mary because she was hit immediately upon entering the door, and the suspect already had the weapon in hand. There was a men's room right across from the boiler room, and the soap in the dish was wet, and the towel the hammer was wrapped in was still damp. Police also stated this case was going to be complex because winos frequently broke into churches to sleep in basements around the area. January 7, 1973, the Bluefield police took the hammer to have it examined by the FBI in Washington, D.C. That same day, a reward was offered and published in the paper. The ad ran in the paper for weeks. January 21, 1973, there was a person of interest who had already been in custody on unrelated charges who was being questioned and considered a suspect, but there was insufficient evidence against this person. By 1975, the case had gone cold. The police did have a suspect in mind, but not enough evidence to charge him with the crime. However, they were keeping tabs on him. They also recovered a thumbprint on the sink faucet and were still hoping this would lead them to the person responsible. The 1980s came and went, and the mentions got fewer and fewer in the paper. But in 1988, the police sent more evidence to the FBI to have it analyzed, but again, nothing. In the 90s, a few witness accounts were published in the paper. This picture was published of Mary's grandson poking around the boiler where the hammer was found, and other pieces of broken wood. Mr. Miller, who was the maintenance man who found the hammer, had been at choir practice the night before with Mary. He said the practice ended around 8:45 p.m., and Mary walked down a dark hallway behind the altar to make sure the door was locked, then to the nursery where Mr. Miller's wife was caring for children. She told Miss Miller to make sure she locked the door. Miss Miller said Mary was as white as a ghost and looked like she had seen something she shouldn't have. The other choir members who were with Mary said she seemed happy when she left the choir loft, so whatever happened took place between the hall and the nursery. She left the church without saying anything to anyone else. When Mary returned home, she called her daughter, who was sick and couldn't come to the phone. The next morning, she walked to the church. She entered through the first ground floor door, which led her into the basement. There was another set of double doors Mary entered, and before she could turn the lights on, she was struck in the face. It also appears she had been kicked in the stomach, then struck on the top of the head. She was dragged into the room where her body was located by her coat collar. Police considered it could be premeditated. There was a trail of matches leading from the broken window to the boiler room, and a Winston cigarette was found. The police offered more and more details, saying they had questioned so many people that it uncovered 4 members having affairs, one of which was homosexual, but all of those involved had alibis and were cleared. They even managed to track down Dracula and question him. Apparently, people in the neighborhood saw a man wearing a cape walking a dog and referred to him as Dracula. Turns out he was visiting from New York City and capes were in fashion there. He was cleared as a suspect as well. The church ended up being sold as membership declined after the incident and people refused to go into the basement. The congregation moved into a new church at a different location. Mary's grandson Barry was 10 years old at the time of his grandmother's death, and in the early to mid-90s he began to take on his own investigation. He found it odd that the 16-year-old boy walked through a hallway covered in blood to the rec room, and the police found no bloody footprints. The boy was never fingerprinted. The pastor had said he had been in the church at 7 a.m. and heard a thud in the basement, but didn't go check it out. His fingerprint didn't match the one on the sink, and he passed a polygraph. He did leave the church a few months later and even left the ministry. February 2018. The fingerprint that was found on the church sink faucet matched a prisoner, Tommy Lee Molahan, who was already serving life for a murder he committed in January of 1973 in West Virginia. Turns out, around the time of Mary's murder, the man had escaped from a prison in North Carolina and hitched a Greyhound bus and admitted to being in Bluefield committing burglaries at the time of Mary's murder. However, he denied being in the church. The bus stop at the time was just over 500 yards away from the church. This saloon is the original location, but in 2022 it moved closer to the state line. July 2018, the charges against Tommy were dropped when a box of evidence in the case could not be located. The Bluefield Police Department had moved from the location sometime in the 1980s and failed to preserve evidence. Of course, Mary's family was devastated by this. A lot of her children had passed on by this time, but her 72-year-old son, Ralph, spoke up, stating he felt since Tommy was already doing life that he would get his day of reckoning as his health was declining. Her grandson Barry said after his grandmother's death it pretty much broke up the family. Every Sunday after church, most of the family who lived in the area would attend church together, then all go to Mary's house afterwards to have a meal together. Even though he was only 10 when his grandmother died, Barry said he could still remember the smell of her kitchen. As you can see, both Mary's house and the church are long gone. The side of South Street they resided on are now parking lots to the industrial businesses facing North Street. The Richmond dry cleaning business was sold after Mr. Miller died and renamed Unique Dry Cleaners. It too is out of business. As of this recording, no one has ever been convicted for Mary's murder. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you on the next video.